Let's talk about the principal's liability, vicarious liability in contract and in tort. Contractual liability is much more heavily tested on the MEE than tort liability. Let's talk about contract liability. So this is the liability of a principal to a third party on a contract entered into by the agent. Here's our general rule. Again, let's memorize it verbatim. A principal is liable on a contract entered into by an agent who has any type of authority, actual, apparent, estoppel, inherent agency power, or purported agent, depending upon the extent to which the principal is known to the third party. So we're building on our knowledge here. A principal is liable on a contract entered into an agent depending on the extent to which the principal is known to the third party. Repeat it again. A principal is liable on a contract entered into by an agent depending on the extent to which the principal is known. To whom? That's right, the third party. We have our disclosed, partially disclosed, and undisclosed principal. If the principal is disclosed, they are liable on all authorized contracts. Repeat, disclosed principal. The identity and existence of the principal are known. This makes the principal liable on all authorized contracts. Is the agent ever personally liable? No. If the contract is authorized, the principal is disclosed, the agent is not personally liable on an authorized contract. The principal is. Okay, the partially disclosed principal. This is that when the third party knows that there is a principal, they know the agent is acting on behalf of a principal, but they don't know who the principal is. The third party knows there's a principal. They know the agent is acting on behalf of that principal, but they have no idea who the principal is. Do you think that the principal is liable for authorized contracts? They know there's a principal. The third party knows there's a principal. They just don't know who it is. Yes, the principal is liable for all authorized contracts made to third parties. And the agent is also liable. So with a disclosed principal, we've got, if it's an authorized contract, the principal's liable. Partially disclosed principal, we know there's a principal, just not who it is. The principal is liable for authorized contracts. The agent is also liable to some extent, but let's go to 3, our undisclosed principal. Undisclosed principal. The agent doesn't tell the third party that he's acting on behalf of the principal, and the third party has no knowledge that the principal is involved. So in other words, the third party has no knowledge of the existence or the identity of the principal. That is an undisclosed principal. Disclosed principal, third party knows of the existence and the identity of the principal. Partially disclosed, the third party knows of the existence of the principal, but not their identity. And in our third situation, the undisclosed principal, the third party has no knowledge that there is a principal, and they have no knowledge of their identity. They have no knowledge that a principal is even involved. The principal is still liable for authorized contracts and for unauthorized contracts. Now, that doesn't seem fair, right? We don't know that there's a principal. The agent acts on behalf of the principal, doesn't tell the third party there is a principal, doesn't tell the third party the name of the principal. The principal is liable for authorized contracts and unauthorized contracts if the person is a general agent. In other words, a general agent, remember, the general agent is authorized to do anything, act in any way that the principal could act themselves. The general agent does for the principal what is done in the usual and necessary course of their business. The general agent is authorized to act in any capacity that the principal could act for on their own. So it doesn't matter if they're undisclosed. Okay, an undisclosed principal. If we have a general agent, the principal is liable for authorized and unauthorized contracts. If the person is a general agent. Okay, so let's make this into one sentence. A general agent can bind an undisclosed principal in contracting with a third party when doing things in the usual and necessary course of business. A general agent can bind an undisclosed principal for contracts that are authorized or unauthorized, because the general agent can bind the principal in any way that the principal could bind himself. Woo, that's a lot. Okay, third party liability to an undisclosed principal. If we have an authorized agent, the principal is liable, the third party is liable to the principal. Third party liability. If we have an undisclosed principal, third party liability. Do they have some liability? Yes. Remember, our general authorized agent can do whatever the principal could do himself. So that third party is liable to the principal on contract, just as if the principal made the contract themselves. Ouch. Undisclosed principal, general authorized agent, principal is liable for authorized and unauthorized contracts. The third party is also liable to pay the principal on contract because the principal could have made that contract themselves. There's only one exception, and that is if we have an undisclosed principal and they are not included on the form of the contract, in the terms of the contract, or their existence is fraudulently concealed. So this seems very unfair. We have an agent walking in, doesn't disclose they're acting on a principal, and yet the third party is bound for authorized and unauthorized contracts. However, the agent can't avoid liability. The principal may avoid liability if they are excluded from the contract or their existence is fraudulently concealed. Ron owns a hardware store. Ron fires Linda. Linda keeps her business card, crosses off Ron's name, and goes to make a contract with the supplier. Now, the supplier probably has a duty to inquire at this point, but Linda makes a contract in the name of Ron's business. Nobody inquires. Ron's business is liable to that third-party supplier because Ron could have made that contract himself. But what if Linda goes off and makes a contract with the supplier and doesn't mention Ron's name on the business? She doesn't mention it on the terms of the contract, or she fraudulently conceals that she's acting on Ron's behalf. Ron's business is not liable if the agent does those fraudulent acts. Linda, the agent herself, can't avoid liability if she contracts in her own name. Ron owns a hardware store. Linda gets fired. She goes out and makes a contract with a supplier in her own name. She can enforce the agreement even if Ron won't. All right, the agent cannot avoid liability if he contracts in his own name and may enforce agreement even when, that's right, the principal renounces it. Okay, so that's liability on contract. Our general rule is the principal is liable on contract entered into by an agent, depending upon the extent to which the principal is known to the third party. Okay, what happens with a fully disclosed principal? That's right, they're liable on all authorized contracts. What about a partially disclosed principal? We know there's a principal, we don't know the name. The principal is liable on all authorized contracts. What about an undisclosed principal? The principal's existence is not known, their identity is not known. They're still liable for authorized and unauthorized contracts entered into by their general agent because that general agent can deal in any way that the principal could have done themselves. How about that third party's liability to the undisclosed principal? If that agent, authorized general agent, made a contract, the third party's liable because the principal could have made the contract themselves. Only two exceptions. The agent excludes the principal from the form or terms of the contract, or the principal's existence is, that's right, fraudulently concealed. And the agent can't avoid liability either, right? If the agent contracts in his own name, the agent is liable on the agreement, and they can also, that's right, enforce the agreement even if the principal renounces the agreement. Moving on to the principal's liability in tort. This is generally tested in tort law. Direct causes of action against a principal would be negligent hiring, retention, or supervision. Remember, the employer has the duty of due care in hiring. They hired someone who had dangerous tendencies. They didn't exercise due care. They knew or should have known that that person would be dangerous. That's negligent hiring, retention, or supervision. So that provides a direct cause of action. However, what we're mainly concerned with is respondeat superior, or vicarious liability, which is an indirect cause of action. You know the rule. The principal is liable for the acts and omissions of an agent that arise when? That's right, during the scope of the agent's employment, and the agent is motivated by the desire to serve the principal. Okay, so if we have an employee, do you think the principal is going to be liable for the acts and omissions of an agent arising during the scope of their employment, motivated by the desire to serve the principal? Yes. Why? That's right. The principal controls the manner and means of work. The operative language is control. So the principal will be liable for acts and omissions in tort of an agent that arise during the scope of the employee's relationship with the principal while it existed, and those actions are motivated by the desire to serve the principal. What do we mean by scope of employment? Scope of employment turns on two things. It's conduct the employee normally performs, and it's within the time and space of employment. Scope of employment, it's duties the employee normally performs, and it's two, within the time and space of employment. So what's scope of employment? That's right, conduct the employee normally performs, and it is within the, that's right, time and space of the employment. All right, is an employer ever liable for an employee's intentional torts? Their batteries, their robberies? Robbery's not a tort. Their batteries, their assaults? No, they're not responsible for the employee who assaults or batters a third party, falsely imprisons them, or whatever. An employer is never liable for an employee's intentional torts. Okay, so But however, under the doctrine of respondeat superior, let's repeat the general rule. The principal is liable for the acts and omissions of the agent that arise during the scope of employment and are motivated by the desire to serve the principal. Scope of employment means the conduct is what the employee normally does on their job, and it's within the time and space of their employment. Okay, let's talk about an independent contractor. What's the operative word? Control. So the principal is not generally liable for acts of independent contractors because they are not controlled by the principal. Remember, the independent contractor is responsible for only the finished product, and they work without any supervision or control by the principal. The independent contractor controls the manner and the means of work. Likely, they provide their own tools, vehicles, supplies, they pay their own expenses. And what's our number one? The independent contractor has special skills or expertise not possessed by the general public. Okay, our general rule, principal's not liable for the actions of independent contractor because they don't have control over the independent contractor's manner and means of work. There are situations, as we know from tort law, where the independent contractor, the principal, will be liable for the actions of an independent contractor. What are those? Oh, yes, abnormally dangerous activities. There are two other situations. Let's say the principal manifests to the third party that this independent contractor is actually an employee. Okay, well, then they are liable for the torts of an independent contractor. The independent contractor that the principal holds out as their agent has apparent authority. And when they mess up in tort, the principal will be liable. So one, inherently dangerous activities. Two, it's the independent contractor has apparent authority because the principal held them out as their agent. What if the independent contractor says, I'm an employee? Guess who's liable? The independent contractor. If an independent contractor fraudulently misrepresents that they are an employee and they commit a tort, then the independent contractor is liable because they misrepresented their status for their own benefit. The independent contractor will be liable in tort. Okay, let's go through two other miscellaneous rules. Let's say we have an authorized agent who's acting in his own interest, not the principal's interest. The principal is still liable on the contract if the third party knows that the agent is not acting on his behalf. Okay, remember the third party has a duty to inquire. So if the third party knows or reasonably should know that there's something fishy and the agent is not acting on the principal's behalf, then the third party has that duty to inquire. But the principal will be liable on the contract if the third party knows the agent is not acting on his behalf. When is the principal liable on contract? When the third party knows the agent is not acting on the principal's behalf. Okay, finally, there's our secret limiting instructions. This comes up on the bar exam all the time. Secret limiting instructions work like this. The principal tells the agent, go out and buy that tractor, but don't bid more than $5,000. The agent goes to the third party and says, will you accept $5,000? And the third party says, no, but I'll take $6,000. And the agent accepts. Is the principal bound? Yes. Who can the third party sue for the difference? The third party can sue the agent. Why? Because they didn't have notice of that secret limiting instruction. Secret limiting instructions don't bind third parties if the third party has no notice. So if the agent is given secret limiting instructions on price, the principal will be bound. The third party has no notice of that secret limit and can enforce it. However, who messed up? The agent. So, although the principal is bound by the contract, the principal can sue the agent for the difference. Okay, scenario again. Ron owns a hardware store. Ron authorizes Linda to go out and buy $5,000 worth of supplies. Linda goes to a third-party supplier and buys $6,000 worth of supplies. Is Ron bound by the contract with the supplier? Yes, because he didn't know Linda had a secret limiting instruction. But what can Ron do? Ron can hold Linda liable for the difference. And that's it.